Hello my dear viewers, I would like to thank you for watching the video and I wanted to say subscribe to my YouTube channel. I will be very grateful and you will not miss new videos. Enjoy the video. My name is Josh Miller and I've always thought of myself as a regular guy. I live in Chicago, I work in IT, and my life is about as exciting as a tax seminar. Or at least it wasn't until the day I found that apartment. It started on a Thursday. I just moved into a new place, a decent little studio on the edge of downtown. Nothing fancy, but it had a good view of the city, and for someone like me, that was enough. I was unpacking when I noticed something strange. The floor plan didn't match. Let me explain. When I first toured the place, the agent gave me a blueprint of the apartment. It was supposed to be straightforward, a single open room with a kitchenette and a tiny bathroom off to the side. But when I stood in the living room, something felt wrong. The wall across from me seemed closer than it should have been, like there was something behind it. I pulled out the blueprint and double-checked. Sure enough, there was supposed to be an extra 3 feet of space behind that wall. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe it was just poor construction, but curiosity got the better of me, and I started knocking on the wall, looking for anything unusual. That's when I heard a hollow sound. I froze, my hand still pressed against the drywall. Hollow walls meant space, right? But there wasn't supposed to be anything back there. Grabbing a flashlight from one of the moving boxes, I crouched down and inspected the baseboard. That's when I noticed something odd. There was a tiny seam in the wall, barely visible unless you were looking for it. I pressed my fingers against it, and to my surprise, the panel popped open. Behind it was a narrow passage. It wasn't much, just a dark, cramped corridor that looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The air smelled stale, like dust and mildew. I should have closed the panel and gone back to unpacking. But something about the passage called to me, like it was daring me to explore. I stepped inside, flashlight in hand, and started walking. The corridor was tight, the walls pressing in on either side. After a few feet, it opened into a small, windowless room. The first thing I noticed was the furniture. It was old, really old. A battered armchair sat in one corner, its fabric torn and stained. There was a wooden table with deep scratches across the surface and a rusted lamp that didn't look like it had worked in years. But what really caught my attention was the wall. It was covered in photographs, dozens of them, pinned up haphazardly. Some were black and white, others faded with age. They all showed the same thing: people. Random people walking through the city, sitting in cafes, standing at bus stops. And in every photo, their faces were crossed out with thick, red ink. My stomach churned as I scanned the wall, my flashlight trembling. These weren't just snapshots, they felt deliberate, like someone had been watching these people. In the center of the wall was a larger photo, framed and hung like a centerpiece. It was of a man, mid-30s, clean-shaven, wearing a suit and tie. His face wasn't crossed out like the others, but there was something unsettling about the way he looked at the camera, like he knew whoever was taking the picture. Beneath the frame was a single word scrawled in red ink, WHY. That was enough for me. I turned and bolted back through the passage, slamming the panel shut behind me. My heart was racing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just walked into something I wasn't supposed to see. But as I stood there, trying to calm down, I heard it. A soft creak. It came from inside the passage. Someone or something was moving in there. I froze, my ear pressed against the wall, straining to hear. The creaking sound wasn't loud, but it was deliberate, slow, measured, like someone taking careful steps. I wanted to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the building was old, the pipes shifting, or the walls settling. But deep down, I knew better. Someone or something was in that passage. I grabbed my phone and called the landlord. It went straight to voicemail. Figures. "Hi, this is Josh Miller in 3C, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I think there's something weird going on with the apartment. Can you call me back when you get this?" I hung up and stood there for a moment, debating what to do. I didn't hear the creaking anymore, but that didn't mean whoever or whatever it was had left. The rest of the night was a blur. I stayed in the living room, pacing back and forth, staring at the spot where the panel was hidden. I didn't sleep. I didn't even try. By morning, I'd convinced myself it was time to leave. Whatever this was, I didn't want any part of it. I started packing my things when my phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. You shouldn't have opened it. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. How did they have my number? My hand shook as I typed back, "Who is this?" No response. Instead, I heard a knock at the door. I approached cautiously, every nerve in my body screaming at me to run. But when I peeked through the peephole, I saw a man standing in the hallway. He was wearing a suit and tie, his face clean-shaven, his posture rigid. It was the man from the photograph. My breath caught in my throat. He didn't move, didn't knock again. He just stood there, staring straight ahead like he knew I was watching. I stepped back, my heart pounding. This wasn't possible. The photograph looked like it was decades old. How could he be standing here now? The knocking came again, louder this time. I backed away, clutching my phone, debating whether to call the police. But before I could dial, the knocking stopped. When I looked through the peephole again, he was gone. That evening, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The air in the apartment felt heavier, like the walls were closing in. I kept hearing faint sounds, creaks, whispers, the occasional soft thud, but every time I checked, there was nothing there. Then I heard the panel. It was a soft click, like someone opening it. My blood ran cold as I grabbed my flashlight and crept toward the wall. I pressed my ear against it, listening. Nothing. Slowly, I pushed the panel open, shining the flashlight inside. The passage was empty, just as dark and narrow as before. But when I stepped inside, I noticed something new. Another photograph. It was pinned to the far wall where the furniture and other photos had been. This one was of me, taken from the passage. I was sitting on my couch, staring at the wall. The time stamp in the corner was from last night. Pinned beneath the photo was a note. "You're next." I don't think I've ever been as terrified as I was in that moment. Seeing myself in the photograph, proof that someone had been in my apartment, watching me, made my stomach churn. I stumbled out of the passage, slamming the panel shut behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I almost dropped the flashlight. I grabbed my phone and called 911. The operator's voice was calm, almost detached. 911, what's your emergency? There's someone in my apartment, I stammered. They've been inside. They've been watching me. Are they in the apartment now? I hesitated, glancing toward the panel. I don't know. The operator asked for my address and told me to stay on the line, but I couldn't. I hung up and grabbed my keys, ready to leave. But when I opened the door to the hallway, I froze. The man in the suit was standing there again. His expression was blank, almost bored, but his eyes locked onto mine as soon as the door opened. "You can't leave," he said. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact, like he was stating the weather. I didn't respond. I just slammed the door and locked it, my heart racing. I grabbed my backpack and stuffed it with whatever I could find: wallet, phone charger, a bottle of water. I didn't care about anything else. All I knew was that I had to get out of there. I ran to the window, my mind racing. I was on the 3rd floor, but maybe I could climb down somehow. Before I could decide, I heard it again, the creaking. This time, it wasn't coming from the panel. It was coming from inside the apartment. I turned slowly, my flashlight scanning the room. The shadows seemed deeper, darker, like they were alive. "Josh," a voice whispered. I whipped around, the beam of light catching the edge of the couch. No one was there. "Josh," the voice said again, closer this time. It wasn't the man in the suit. It was me. The voice was mine, but it was distorted, wrong, like hearing a recording played underwater. I backed toward the door, my breath coming in short gasps. The panel on the wall creaked open, and for a split second I saw something move inside. A shadow, tall and angular, just before the panel slammed shut again. I yanked the door open and ran. The hallway was empty. I bolted for the stairs, taking them two at a time. My only thought was to get as far away from that apartment as possible. When I reached the lobby, I saw the police officers talking to the landlord. Relief flooded through me as I rushed toward them. "You have to help me," I said, my voice shaking. "Someone's in my apartment. They've been following me." The landlord frowned. "Josh, what are you talking about?" I opened my mouth to respond, but one of the officers cut me off. "What apartment are you in?" 3C, I said. The landlord's frown deepened. 3C. "That's been empty for years." I froze. "What?" "No, I just moved in, a week ago." The landlord shook his head. "That apartment's been boarded up since the fire. No one's lived there since." His words cut off as the officers exchanged a look. "What fire?" I demanded. The landlord hesitated. "It happened 5 years ago. Some guy lived there, kept to himself, didn't talk to anyone. One day, there was smoke pouring out of the place. By the time the fire department got in, he was gone. Just disappeared." "What was his name?" I asked, my stomach twisting. The landlord hesitated again, then finally said, "Frank. Something. Frank Miller." My blood ran cold. Miller. That was my last name. My knees went weak. Miller. My last name? Was it a coincidence? It had to be, right? "No," I said, shaking my head. "That's not possible. I moved in last week. I've been staying there and packing, sleeping, everything." The landlord's expression darkened. "Josh, you've got the wrong apartment. 3C is sealed. It's been vacant since the fire." One of the officers stepped forward. "Sir, we'll go upstairs and take a look. Why don't you wait here?" "No," I said quickly. "I'm coming with you. You need to see it for yourself." We climbed the stairs together, my heart pounding louder with every step. When we reached the 3rd floor, I froze. The door to 3C was different. It wasn't the plain brown door I'd left behind. It was charred, blackened by fire, with a faint smell of smoke still clinging to it. Yellow caution tape crisscrossed the frame, brittle and faded. "This can't be right," I whispered. The officer nearest to me pulled out a flashlight and shone it at the door. "Sir, no one's been in here for years. It's condemned." I didn't believe him. I shoved past them, pushing the door open. It creaked loudly, the hinges stiff with rust. The air inside was thick and heavy, carrying the acrid smell of soot and decay. The apartment was nothing like I remembered. The walls were scorched, the furniture reduced to ash and twisted metal. The window I'd tried to climb out of was shattered, the glass still littering the floor. "This isn't real," I muttered, stepping inside. This isn't my apartment, but it was. In the corner, half buried in debris, was the panel I'd found. It was partially open, just as I'd left it. The officer followed my gaze, frowning. "What's that?" I didn't answer. I walked to the panel and pushed it open. The passage was still there, just as dark and narrow as before. "I told you," I said, my voice trembling. "There's something in here." The officer hesitated, then motioned for his partner to follow. "Stay behind us." We stepped into the passage, the beam of their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The walls felt closer than I remembered, the air colder. When we reached the end, the small room was just as I'd left it. The scratched table, the old chair, the photographs on the wall, everything was there. Except for one thing, the man in the suit was sitting in the chair. His face was shadowed, but I recognized him instantly. My breath caught in my throat as the officers froze, their flashlights fixed on him. "Sir, you need to stand up," one of them said, his voice steady but tense. The man didn't move. "Sir, I'm giving you one last chance," the officer warned. Still nothing. The second officer moved closer, reaching out to grab the man's shoulder. The moment he touched him, the lights went out. The darkness was absolute, swallowing everything. I couldn't see, couldn't hear anything except my own breathing, and then the voice came again. "You shouldn't have come back, Josh." It was him, the man in the suit, but it was also me. The sound of footsteps echoed around the room, circling me closer and closer. My chest tightened as panic took over. "Who are you?" I shouted into the void. His voice came from behind me, cold and steady. "I'm what you left behind." Suddenly, the lights flickered back on. The room was empty. The officers were gone. And the photographs on the wall, they were different. They all showed me. Dozens of pictures, taken at different points in my life, playing as a kid, sitting in class, walking to work. In the center was the same photograph I'd seen before, the man in the suit. Only now, his face wasn't blank, it was mine. Beneath it, written in red ink, was a single word: "Welcome." The screen fades to black as Josh's voice delivers the final line. Josh voiceover: "Some places don't just remember you. They hold on to you forever." Text appears on screen. The end. If I'd known that day would flip my life upside down, I might have done things differently. Maybe I wouldn't have taken the shortcut through the alley. Maybe I wouldn't have picked up those keys. But life doesn't give you a warning, it just happens. I live in London, in one of those old brick flats where the plumbing creaks louder than the neighbors. My days are predictable: work, home, sleep, repeat. Boring, sure, but safe. At least it used to feel that way. It started on a cold November evening. The kind where the air feels like it's biting your face and the city smells like wet pavement and burnt coffee. I was walking back from work, headphones in, when I spotted them, a set of keys. They were lying in the middle of the alley I always cut through, shiny, almost new. It wasn't the kind of place you'd expect someone to drop something so important. Most people don't even stop here. It's narrow, dimly lit, with graffiti that's more unsettling than artistic. I bent down to pick them up. There was a tag attached, a plain black rectangle with an address etched into the surface. No name, just an address about 2 streets over from my flat. I hesitated. What kind of person just leaves their keys in an alley? It felt wrong, but I told myself it was probably just an accident. Someone hurrying, keys slipping from their pocket, that's what I wanted to believe, anyway. I slipped the keys into my coat pocket and decided I'd drop them off on my way home. No big deal, right? Just a good deed for the day. But when I got to the address, the building didn't look like someone lived there. It was one of those old Victorian houses, the kind that's been chopped into flats or left to rot. The windows were dark and the air around it felt heavy. I walked up the steps, clutching the keys in my hand. My heart was pounding for no reason I could explain. There was no doorbell, just a rusted brass knocker shaped like a lion's head. I knocked twice, the sound echoing in the empty street. No one answered. I knocked again, louder this time, still nothing. I almost left the keys on the doorstep and walked away, but something stopped me. A sound. It was faint, coming from inside the house. A creak, like someone was walking across the floor. "Hello," I called out. My voice sounded small against the cold air. Nothing. I should have left. I know that now, but curiosity is a funny thing. It makes you ignore every red flag. I tried the keys in the door just to see if they fit. And they did. When the lock clicked, my stomach flipped. I don't know why, but I pushed the door open. The hallway was dark, and the air smelled damp, like old wood and mildew. My phone flashlight barely made a dent in the shadows. "Hello," I called again, stepping inside. The floor creaked under my weight. No one answered. But as I moved deeper into the house, I noticed something odd. The sound I'd heard earlier, it wasn't footsteps. It was something else, a faint tapping, like nails on wood. I followed it, my heart racing with every step, and then I saw it. At the end of the hallway, on the floor, was a single photograph. I bent down to pick it up, my hands trembling. It was a picture of me, taken earlier that day, walking through the alley. My blood turned to ice. The photograph was unmistakable. It was me, walking through the alley just hours ago. Same coat, same scarf, even the way my hair was tied back. Someone had been watching me. The tapping sound echoed again, snapping me out of my trance. It was coming from upstairs now, faint but deliberate, like someone wanted me to follow. My instincts screamed to leave, to throw the keys and run back to the safety of my flat. But I didn't. I crept up the staircase, the wood groaning beneath my feet. The air felt colder with every step, and my flashlight barely illuminated the narrow corridor at the top. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a thick, unnerving silence. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. That's when I noticed the door at the end of the hall. It was slightly ajar, just enough for me to see a sliver of light spilling out. I moved toward it slowly, the photograph still clutched in my hand. When I pushed the door open, the first thing I noticed was the smell. It was faint but sharp, like something metallic, blood. The room was small, barely furnished, with peeling wallpaper and a single flickering bulb hanging from the ceiling. And in the center of the room was a table. On the table sat a second photograph. I hesitated before picking it up. my stomach churning. This one was worse. It wasn't just me in the picture, it was me inside this very house. Standing in the hallway, looking at the front door. My heart pounded in my chest. This couldn't be real. It was impossible. Whoever had taken this picture, they were here. I spun around, shining my flashlight into the corners of the room. Nothing, just shadows that seemed too deep, too alive. And then I saw it. Scratched into the wall, just above the table, were 3 words, KEP looking, Lena. My breath caught in my throat. They knew my name. I stumbled backward, slamming into the wall. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. How could they know me? How did they know I'd come here? I turned and bolted for the stairs, every instinct screaming at me to get out, but as I reached the top step, I froze. The front door, the one I'd left wide open, was now closed. I crept down slowly, gripping the railing for support. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the flashlight. When I reached the door, I grabbed the handle and pulled. It wouldn't budge. No, I whispered, yanking harder. The door didn't move an inch. It was locked. And then, from somewhere behind me, I heard it again, the tapping. It wasn't faint this time. It was loud and deliberate, coming from the hallway upstairs. I spun around, shining the flashlight toward the staircase. A figure stood at the top. They were completely still, their face obscured by the shadows. But there was no mistaking the shape of them, a person standing in the exact spot I'd been in the second photograph. I didn't wait to see what they would do. I ran. I ran blindly, not caring where I was going. All I knew was I needed to get away from whoever or whatever was standing at the top of those stairs. The hallway blurred as I sprinted back toward the kitchen, hoping to find another exit. But every door I tried was locked, the windows boarded shut. Panic clawed at my chest as I fumbled with my phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. But when I unlocked it, my stomach dropped. The screen was frozen. A single message filled the display. White text on a black background. You shouldn't have come here. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the phone. That's when I heard it again, the tapping. This time it was right behind me. I turned slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. The beam caught the edges of the dim kitchen, rusted appliances, peeling wallpaper, and shadows pooling in the corners. No one was there. And then, from the corner of my eye, I noticed something, a small door. It was tucked beneath the staircase, partially hidden behind an old, tattered curtain. I hadn't seen it before. The tapping sound came again, louder this time, echoing from behind the door. I should have walked away. I should have kept looking for a way out. But something about the door, it felt like an invitation. My fingers brushed against the handle, cold and slick with condensation. Slowly, I pulled it open. Inside was a staircase leading down into the basement. The smell hit me immediately, damp, musty, and faintly metallic, like rust and old pipes. The tapping had stopped, replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. I shone my flashlight down the steps, the beam revealing the edges of a concrete floor below. "Hello?" My voice sounded small and weak. No answer. I took a deep breath and started down, my steps slow and deliberate. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each one sounding like a warning. At the bottom, the basement stretched out in front of me, a cold, empty space lit by a single, flickering bulb. But it wasn't empty. In the middle of the room was a chair, and sitting on the chair was another photograph. I approached cautiously, every instinct screaming at me to turn around and run. The photo showed a man, tied to the very chair in front of me. His head was slumped forward, his face obscured by shadows. But what made my blood run cold wasn't the man, it was the background. The photo had been taken right here in this basement. The air around me felt heavier, thicker, like the walls were closing in. I turned in a slow circle, flashlight sweeping across the room. That's when I saw it, another door. It was steel, rusted and heavy, with scratches marring its surface. Something or someone had been trying to get out. I didn't want to open it. Every nerve in my body screamed not to. But I knew that if I left now, I'd never stop wondering what was behind it. The keys. I reached into my pocket and pulled them out, my hands trembling. One of them had to fit. I tried the first key. Nothing. The second. Nothing. The third clicked. My heart felt like it was about to explode as I gripped the handle and pulled the door open. Inside, the room was pitch black. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, illuminating a space smaller than I expected. And then I saw them, eyes, dozens of them. They reflected the light back at me, and blinking, watching, I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet. The flashlight clattered to the ground, its beam spinning wildly around the room. And that's when I realized they weren't eyes at all. They were cameras. The walls, the ceiling, every surface was covered in cameras, all of them pointed directly at the center of the room, where the chair sat, and on the floor beneath the chair was a pool of something dark. My head spun as I pieced it together. This wasn't just some abandoned house, it was a trap, a setup. And I was in the middle of it. I couldn't breathe. The walls glared back at me, covered in those silent, watching cameras. It wasn't just the chair in the center of the room, it was the whole space. This wasn't a basement, it was a stage. Every instinct told me to leave, to get out of that house and never look back. But my legs felt like they were rooted to the floor. The dark pool beneath the chair shimmered faintly in the flickering light, its meaning clear. Someone had been here. Recently, I snatched my flashlight from the floor and shone it around the room, desperate for any explanation. That's when I noticed the wires. They snaked across the floor and up the walls, feeding into the cameras, looping around the ceiling. My beam followed them to a small metal box mounted in the corner of the room. A control panel. I moved toward it, my footsteps hesitant. The box was open, its contents blinking faintly. A screen sat in the middle, covered in smudges. I wiped it clean and froze. The screen was playing a live feed. It showed the hallway upstairs, and standing in that hallway was me. Not a recording, not a still image. Me, right now, in the exact clothes I was wearing, holding the flashlight. I staggered backward, my heart racing. It wasn't possible. How could I be there when I was? Here, and then the screen flickered. The figure I'd seen earlier, the one standing at the top of the stairs, was now on the screen. Their back was to the camera, but something about the way they stood sent a chill down my spine. They weren't alone. Another figure stepped into the frame, their face obscured by a hood. They turned slowly, as if looking directly at the camera, directly at me. I turned off the screen, my hands trembling. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. A faint sound echoed from the doorway behind me. A creak. I spun around, flashlight aimed at the entrance to the room. My beam caught the edge of the steel door I'd unlocked earlier. It was open just a crack, swinging ever so slightly on its hinges, and then I saw it. On the floor, just outside the door, was another photograph. I stepped forward cautiously, my heart hammering in my chest. The photo was smeared with something dark ink, or maybe something worse. I held it up to the light and felt my stomach lurch. It was the chair in the center of the room. Empty, except for a single word scrawled on the seat in red, "Run." I didn't think, I just ran. Up the stairs, through the hallway, past the door that somehow still wouldn't open. My flashlight barely kept up as I bolted back into the kitchen. "Please," I whispered, yanking on the back door. Locked. Every exit was locked. The sound of footsteps echoed from upstairs. Slow, deliberate, they weren't in a rush. I dove into a pantry near the back of the kitchen, slamming the door shut behind me. The air was thick and stifling, filled with the faint scent of mothballs and dust. Through the thin wooden slats, I could see the edge of the kitchen. My flashlight was off, and I tried to steady my breathing as the footsteps grew louder. They reached the kitchen. A shadow stretched across the floor, tall and angular. I bit down on my lip, willing myself not to make a sound. The figure moved slowly, their footsteps heavy against the tiles. And then they stopped right in front of the pantry door. I held my breath, my heart pounding so loudly I thought they might hear it. The shadow didn't move, and then a voice. Low, soft, and impossibly close. "You shouldn't have opened the door." The pantry light flickered, and everything went black. When the light went out, everything disappeared, my breath, my thoughts, even time itself. I couldn't see anything, couldn't move. All I could do was feel the overwhelming darkness pressing in on me, suffocating. And then the pantry door creaked open. For a split second I considered running, but there was nowhere to go. I braced myself, expecting to come face to face with the shadow I'd seen in the kitchen. But the figure wasn't there. The doorway was empty. I stepped out cautiously, my flashlight trembling in my hand as I clicked it back on. The beam cut through the darkness, landing on the walls, the countertops, the cold, empty floor. The house was silent again until I heard a sound. It wasn't the tapping this time, or even the footsteps. It was a voice. Soft, faint, and echoing from somewhere deep within the house. It was saying my name, Lena. I froze, the flashlight shaking as I swept it across the kitchen. The voice was coming from the basement. The smart thing to do would have been to leave, to stop trying to make sense of any of it. But I couldn't. Something was pulling me back. I made my way to the basement door, my pulse hammering in my chest. It felt heavier this time, as if the air itself was holding me back. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the scene was exactly how I'd left it. The chair sat in the middle of the room, the cameras still staring down from the walls. But now, there was something else, another photograph. It was taped to the back of the chair, perfectly placed for me to find. I peeled it off, my hands shaking. The picture showed the steel door I'd opened earlier, the one with the cameras inside. But now, the cameras weren't empty. The photo showed the images they were recording. Dozens of people, strangers, all of them tied to chairs just like the one in the basement. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide with terror. And in the corner of the photo was a timestamp. It wasn't from the past, it was from the future. Tomorrow night, 10 p.m. I dropped the photo, my breath coming in short gasps. This wasn't just a trap, it was a plan, and I was part of it. The voice called my name again, louder this time. I spun around, flashlight aimed at the far wall. That's when I saw the figure again. They were standing just inside the steel door, barely visible in the dim light. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "What do you want from me?" The figure didn't answer. Instead, they stepped forward, slowly, deliberately. And then I saw their face. It was mine. No, it wasn't just mine. It was me. Same coat, same scarf, same wide-eyed expression of terror. "You should have stayed away," they said, their voice identical to mine. I stumbled back, my head spinning. This isn't real. This can't be real." "You opened the door," they said, their voice cold and steady. "Now it's your turn." The figure moved closer, and I couldn't look away. The cameras on the walls whirred to life, their red lights blinking in unison, and then the basement changed. The walls shifted, the cameras vanished, and the room became something else entirely. A white, sterile space, like a hospital or a lab. The chair was gone, replaced by a table covered in tools, scalpels, wires, things I didn't want to name. I was no longer alone. The room was filled with people now, their faces hidden behind masks. They didn't speak, didn't acknowledge me. But I could feel them watching, and then the voice came again. Not from me, not from the figure, but from the air itself. "Welcome to the experiment, Lena. Your part begins now." I don't remember what happened after that. When I woke up, I was back in the alley where I'd found the keys. It was morning, the sunlight almost blinding. In my hand was another photograph. It showed me standing in the alley, looking at the camera with the same terrified expression I'd seen in the basement. On the back, written in that same blocky handwriting, were 3 words, "You're next." My name's David, and I work as a private investigator. It's not as glamorous as the movies make it seem. Most of my cases involve cheating spouses or missing pets. But about a year ago, I got a call that changed everything. It was a woman named Emily Barnes. Her voice trembled as she explained that her husband, Adam, had gone missing. She didn't want to go to the police yet, fearing it would attract unwanted attention. "Please," she said, "I just need someone discreet to find him." At first, I thought it was just another case of a guy running off. But as I listened, I sensed there was more to the story. I agreed to take the case, not knowing it would pull me into a mystery I'd still be trying to untangle. When I met Emily at a small cafe downtown, she looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in days. She explained that Adam, a successful tech entrepreneur, had been acting strangely for weeks before his disappearance. He'd been distant, staying out late, and locking his phone away. "I thought he might be having an affair," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, but then he just vanished. She handed me a small folder of information, Adam's recent photos, his last known whereabouts, and a copy of their phone bill with a series of unrecognized numbers. "Please find him," she begged. "I just want to know the truth." I promised to do my best, but something about her story didn't sit right with me. My first step was to visit Adam's office. His assistant, a nervous young man named Peter, confirmed that Adam hadn't shown up in over a week. "He seemed stressed lately," Peter said, "like something was weighing on him." I also checked out the last place Adam was seen, a gas station on the outskirts of town. The security footage showed him filling up his car late at night. He looked agitated, glancing around like he was being followed. But after that, the trail went cold. His credit cards hadn't been used, and his phone was turned off. It was like he'd vanished into thin air. Just as I was running out of ideas, Emily called me in a panic. "Someone left this on my doorstep," she said. It was an envelope with a single photo inside. It showed Adam sitting in a dimly lit room, looking terrified. There was no note, no explanation, just the photo. I asked her if she recognized the room, but she shook her head. "What does this mean?" she asked. I didn't have an answer, but I knew one thing. This wasn't a simple case of a man running away. Someone had taken Adam, or worse. Determined to find answers, I dug deeper into Adam's life. That's when I found out something Emily hadn't told me. Adam was involved in a lawsuit with a former business partner, a man named Victor Crane. The case was messy, allegations of stolen ideas and millions of dollars at stake. I tracked down Victor, who claimed he hadn't seen Adam in months. But his smug attitude and evasive answers made me suspicious. "If you're looking for Adam, good luck," he said with a smirk. "He's probably hiding from more than just me." What did he mean by that? And why hadn't Emily mentioned the lawsuit? The deeper I went, the more questions I had and the fewer answers I found. Just as I was piecing together Adam's lawsuit drama, I received a text from an unknown number. "Stop looking for him. This isn't your business." It sent a chill down my spine. Who was this? Victor, someone else. The message wasn't threatening, but it was clear someone didn't want me digging any deeper. I tried to trace the number, but it led to a burner phone. Whoever sent it knew how to stay off the radar. Instead of backing off, it only made me more determined to figure out what had happened to Adam. I went back to Emily, pressing her for more details about Adam's recent behavior. At first, she hesitated, but eventually, she admitted something she hadn't told me before. "Adam started meeting with someone a few months ago," she said. "He wouldn't tell me who it was, but I saw a name pop up on his calendar. S. Monroe." The name meant nothing to me, but it was a lead. After some digging, I found a connection: a man named Samuel Monroe who had a criminal record involving fraud and extortion. He'd recently been released from prison and was last seen in the same city as Adam. I decided to follow the financial trail. Adam's credit cards were unused, but his bank accounts told a different story. Large sums of money had been withdrawn in cash over the past few months. It was almost like he'd been preparing for something or someone. When I showed Emily the bank statements, she looked genuinely surprised. "I didn't know about this," she said, her voice shaking. I wasn't sure if I believed her. The withdrawals lined up with the time Adam had started acting strangely. It seemed like he was either running from something or paying someone off. While I was digging into Samuel Monroe's background, I noticed a car following me. At first, I thought it was a coincidence, but it kept showing up at the grocery store, outside my office, even parked down the street from my house. One night, the car pulled up alongside me as I was walking to my front door. The window rolled down just enough for someone to toss a folded piece of paper onto the ground before speeding off. The note read, "Last warning, walk away." I knew I was getting close to something big. The breakthrough came when I found an old property registered under Samuel Monroe's name, a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town. I staked it out for hours, watching as different people came and went. Late at night, a black SUV pulled up, and 2 men got out. One of them was unmistakably Victor Crane. I knew I couldn't just barge in, so I waited until the coast was clear and broke in after they left. Inside, I found a small room that looked eerily similar to the one in the photo of Adam, same peeling walls, same dim lighting. But Adam wasn't there. All I found was a notebook filled with cryptic notes and a list of names. Adam's name was on it, along with several others. Some were crossed out. The notebook was a gold mine of information. Each name on the list had notes scribbled beside it, dates, locations, and cryptic references like settled, pending, or neutralized. Adam's name had pending next to it. I took the notebook to a contact of mine, Lisa, a former journalist who specialized in investigative work. She recognized a few of the crossed-out names. "These are people tied to high-profile financial crimes," she said. Some of them vanished without a trace. Lisa and I dug deeper into the notebook. The connections led to a larger conspiracy involving Samuel Monroe, Victor Crane, and a network of illegal activities, blackmail, extortion, and possibly murder. Feeling the pressure, I confronted Emily with what I'd found. At first, she played the role of the worried wife, but when I mentioned the notebook and Samuel Monroe, her facade cracked. She finally admitted the truth. Adam had been laundering money for Monroe's criminal network. When he tried to pull out, things turned ugly. Emily claimed she had no choice but to hire me because she was being watched and couldn't go to the police. "You were supposed to find him quietly," she said, her voice desperate. "Now they know someone's digging around." I realized Emily had been withholding crucial details from the start, likely to protect herself. With Monroe and his men now aware of my involvement, time was running out. Lisa and I worked tirelessly to connect the dots. We found out that Adam had tried to create an escape plan, siphoning off money from Monroe's operation into a hidden account. But Monroe wasn't the only danger. Victor Crane had his own vendetta against Adam, accusing him of sabotaging their former business. It became clear that both men had a reason to want Adam gone. The more we uncovered, the more it seemed Adam might already be dead. But there was one last lead, a suspicious transaction leading to an abandoned cabin outside the city. I made my way to the cabin, armed with nothing but a flashlight and the nagging feeling I was walking into a trap. The place was eerily quiet, with the faint smell of gasoline lingering in the air. Inside, I found signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, broken glass, and blood stains. In the corner of the room was a laptop, its screen cracked but still functional. On it was a draft of an email from Adam, addressed to Emily. "I'm sorry for everything. I made a mistake trusting them. If you're reading this, I didn't make it out. Don't trust anyone," especially the email cut off there. Suddenly, I heard footsteps outside. Before I could react, the door burst open. It was Monroe and one of his henchmen. "You've been a real pain, you know that," Monroe said, his voice cold and calm. He demanded the notebook, threatening to end things right here if I didn't comply. Thinking fast, I threw the laptop at the henchman, grabbed a heavy chair, and smashed it into Monroe, giving myself enough time to escape out the back door. I ran through the woods, dialing 911 as I went. When the police arrived, Monroe and his men were gone, but the evidence at the cabin, combined with the notebook, was enough to tie him and Victor Crane to multiple crimes. Epilogue: what happened to Adam? Despite everything, Adam was never found. The notebook and laptop suggested he might have been planning to fake his own death to escape both Monroe and Crane, but there was no proof he succeeded. Emily disappeared shortly after the case went public, leaving behind more questions than answers. As for me, I've taken on dozens of cases since, but none as haunting as this one. I'll always wonder if Adam managed to outsmart everyone or if he became just another name crossed off Monroe's list.